In my case, self-absorption is completely justified. I have never discovered any other subject so worthy of my attention. Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Geneva.
And I'm Tatum.
We are two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. All right, back again. Tatum,
Yes.
how's it going?
It's going good.
Good.
Yeah. No complaints. Super, busy with planning film things, but I'm good. Yeah.
Good.
How
yeah.
about you, Geneva? How are you doing?
It's going great. Have you seen anything recently that you might want to talk about?
I have, yeah. So I think I mentioned last episode that I'm trying to catch up on all of these TV shows
All
that
of the
all
TV.
dropped in 1 week. And so I've been able to make some progress on 2 of them. I was able to finish the third season of The Great, and I was able to watch a few episodes of Documentary Now. So I will start with Documentary Now, I guess. Documentary Now is definitely a show where it is a very specific type of humor made for a very specific type of brain. And that brain happens to be my brain. This season is really, really good. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe how they come up with these concepts. John Mulaney and Seth Meyers wrote majority, if not all, of the episodes this season, and they're just really wacky and weird. Again, we have Alexander Skarsgård doing a really totally divergent character from anything he's ever done, playing this like old German man who's got this outrageous accent that is just so stupid. And and then Kate Blanchett returns for yet another fantastic episode of Documentary Now. She had an episode in season 3, or I forget what season we're on now, but the previous season she had a great episode, and she's got another one this time around, which I didn't know she had. And I didn't even recognize her until she started talking, and I was like, that sounds like Kate Blanchett.
I don't even know if I knew Kate Blanchett
that
was on
is Kate
Documentary
Blanchett.
Now. Wow.
Yeah. She was really great in the episode last season, and she was in this one as well. It was more of a minor role this season, but still, it was amazing. So yeah, anyway, I'm halfway through the most recent season of Documentary Now. If you're a Documentary Now fan and you haven't already seen this season, please go watch it. It's just a lot of fun. It's incredibly stupid and silly and just weird, but it's a wild ride that I enjoy every time. So just to say, for people who don't know what Documentary Now is, I guess it's a mockumentary television show where the show initially started out starring Bill Hader and Fred Armisen in every single episode, and they took actual documentaries that exist and they did their own like mockumentary ridiculous twist on them. But as time has gone on, Bill Hader is no longer really attached other than being a producer, and Fred Armisen pops in every once in a while. But now they're kind of, they bring in these big stars to pretend to be someone else. And sometimes they still are doing mockumentaries of actual documentaries. And then some of them they're just coming up with like from their ridiculous brains and saying, this would be a ridiculous idea for a documentary. Let's make it. So yeah, but all of the characters in the documentaries take themselves very seriously. And I love watching how much these characters in the stories think that their lives are totally normal and really serious and really important. It's like, this is the weirdest or the dumbest thing ever. But yeah, so that's the premise of Documentary Now. If you haven't seen the most recent season, go watch it. It's good. And if you haven't seen Documentary Now, I would recommend trying it out. Might not be your thing. Again, it's a very specific type of humor, but it's worth trying. And it is an IFC production that is streaming on Netflix. So yeah, and then to get into The Great a little bit, I won't like take too long to talk about it because, you know, it's
I also
10
have some
hours
things to say about The Great, so I'm very excited to hear.
It's like
what your
10
final
hours
thoughts.
worth of content. So Geneva will probably have to talk at more length about this when we're not recording the podcast. But yeah, I'm very lukewarm on this season. I think it started out interesting and then it really lost me in the middle. I was like, what is the point of any of this? I don't understand where this is going. Like, I'm intrigued by certain storylines, but cut out all the other ones because they're not important and they're not interesting to me. And then there was a very unexpected decision that they made at a certain point about 3/4 of the way, just over halfway through the season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe like, I won't say what episode it is, but yeah, something happens that kind of changes the course of the show. I like the initial responses to that, but then I feel like it kind of like spitters out at the end, and I'm kind of back in this place of, okay, I don't know if I'm really interested enough to come back to this. So I have very mixed feelings on it. And to be quite honest, I'm not always this person, but with this show in particular, it really, really bothers me how much sex is in it. It's really unnecessary, and it gets to a point when it's just like, this is ridiculous, and you can't just, it feels like a cheap joke of just like, someone's trying to be funny, so let's put a poop joke in. It's like, poop jokes can be funny, not if you do them 50 million times, but they're like, no, but it's poop, so it's funny. Not this show, but just that as an example. Whereas I feel like this is something where it's like, oh, let's like put a weird sex thing in here because sex is funny. I'm like, it's not inherently funny to like, there is so much nudity and so much sex in this season that I'm like, it really turned me off a lot.
More so than the previous seasons?
I feel like it was. And also the ratio of male to female nudity is really disturbing to me. They're like, it's probably 99% naked women, and it just bothers me.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's a lot of media, unfortunately.
Yeah, for me it was irritating because I don't mind if there's sex in TV shows if it's actually benefiting and propelling the story and developing the characters. And I feel like this was just like, let's just put a sex scene in there for no reason. I'm like, okay, why? So yeah, I don't know. I just felt like it lacked a little bit of creativity, and it was relying on a lot of tropes in order to propel the story forward. And then it took a risk, and I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, okay, so I guess we're going in this direction now. So overall, I don't regret watching it. It was fine. But I was not like, I did not enjoy it from start to finish. And I will start out season 4. I'm willing to give season 4 a chance, but if it doesn't grip me, I probably won't keep watching The Great.
That's really interesting because I had almost the entirely different reaction from you. I really love this season.
That never happens for us, Geneva.
I know. We're such similar people. I really love this season. I mainlined the first 2 seasons, probably actually not even that long ago, maybe 6 months ago now. They run together in my mind a little bit because I watch them so close together. But this might actually be my favorite season. I think the risks, the narrative risks that it takes, for me, they're surprising, and I can definitely see why they would turn some people off. But for me, they really pay off in terms of the new avenues that they open up for the characters. For me, the first part of the season is where it is a little bit samey because you kind of have the same things happening to the characters. And with the change in the story that they take around halfway through the season, it allows for this really, really different ideas to be explored, really different sort of sets of decision making that the characters have to face, ways for them to grow and change in unexpected ways. I thought there were some really interesting themes in the second half that I don't want to get too spoilery, but that were explored in terms of, kind of just the idea of leadership and balancing, trying to do the right thing for the people with ideas of control, destiny, mob.
Did I choose the word destiny, or was it actually my destiny? When did I say that? Does it matter?
Yeah. Anyway, and I mean, for me too, one of the things that I really love about the show is the secondary characters, and the decisions they make in the second half of the show allow a lot of the secondary characters to really shine in ways that they hadn't gotten to shine before. I'm very intrigued. Yeah, I really loved it. I really loved this season of The Great. And honestly, I don't know whether they're going to do a season 4, especially because Elle Fanning and Nicholas Hoult are becoming more and more famous and in demand as actors. But if they do, I will be watching. I will be sat. I'm very excited. I would really love to see where the story goes from there.
They'll be making a season 4. They'll be making a season 4.
I hope so.
Because
I feel like this season for some reason has not been promoted as much as the previous 2 seasons were. And I don't know if it's just my imagination, but it feels like they just basically dropped this season out of nowhere with almost no build up. There's not been a whole lot of chatter that I've seen online. The trailer was only released like a couple weeks before the season dropped. There wasn't a whole lot of promotion that I was seeing, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Nicholas Hoult was out promoting his Nicolas Cage vampire movie.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Come on. You could do 2 things at once.
Nicolas Cage paid him more money.
The 2 Nikolai.
Yes.
So anyway, yeah. So if you're on the fence,
you and I have to talk about it off the air, because I would like to have a spoiler conversation with you about a lot of things.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think we can all agree, though. Can we at least agree? Maxim is Maximesque.
Oh my gosh, Maxim! I'm glad they gave him more to do this season.
Oh my gosh,
really
absolute shining star, MVP of that season.
Yeah. Yes, he was great, and also he trying so hard to assert himself as this person, and then he makes the stupidest mistake out of the whole. Because
he's a literal 10-year-old child.
Yeah,
oh, it's so good.
All right. Anyway.
The only other thing of note that I've seen recently is I went to see Blackberry in theaters, which is it's a sort of tech business story in the vein of, The Social Network or Air, Tetris, things like that, the story of a company. And so it's about the Blackberry, the portable, I guess, cell phone texting email device that was pre-iPhone that had a chokehold on everybody.
You say that as if you've never seen a BlackBerry. Have you never seen a BlackBerry?
I did not get my first cell phone until high school.
But your parents didn't have BlackBerries?
No, my parents didn't have BlackBerries.
No one you knew had a BlackBerry.
Who were we?
Both of my parents had BlackBerries, and everyone I knew had a BlackBerry. At least all the adults did.
No, that was for rich people. No, we didn't have Blackberries.
Is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is my perception.
I'm am I a privileged? Obviously, as Americans, we're all privileged in certain ways, but I'm does that make me a rich person?
Well, okay.
Parents had BlackBerry? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure we weren't super rich.
Okay, for perspective, my dad only recently got a smartphone within the last year. My mom does not have a smartphone. So this is the level of cellular technology we're talking about with my parents.
I just think it's so funny that you're so apparently this thing called the BlackBerry that blah, blah. I'm you mean the phone that every adult had for 3 years?
I never
in a row?
encountered one while I was a child. That was for business people. Anyway.
I used to play games on my dad's BlackBerry. There was the little snake game where it would chase after its own tail. And
yeah. I remember that. Not on a BlackBerry though. Anyway. I love it when Tatum and I discover what different childhoods we had sometimes.
We had very different childhoods, but it's great.
It's great, yeah. Anyway, movie pretty good, I would say. I haven't seen a huge amount of these types of stories. I wouldn't say it's kind of my go-to genre or anything like that. Obviously, anything is going to pale in comparison with The Social Network, which is just one of the best movies the last 20 years about technology and its effect on society. But I would say Blackberry is a pretty good movie, very good performances. Glenn Howerton in particular is really phenomenal in it. There's a lot of just kind of interesting character stuff about the way that, I mean, it's a tale as old as time, but the way that wealth and fame corrupts the soul and tempts you to compromise your values. But it's done very well. And if you have any interest in this time period, in the idea of technology, in the idea of kind of, new emerging forms of tech building people up and then changing so quickly and causing other people to get lost in the dust. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. So I would recommend.
Yeah, I had never heard of it before you said, well, the movie, not the phone.
Clearly you'd heard of a blackberry. Apparently you guys were just swimming in blackberries.
Oh yeah, just drowning in them. But yeah, I'd never heard of the movie, so I'll have to go look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we move on over to our movie for the day?
Laura.
Not Lara. Laura.
Yeah.
I had an ex-coworker who I mistakenly pronounced her name Laura, and she's like, it's not Lara, it's Laura.
Yeah. Yep. I always, sorry, this is like a short tangent, but I love how Laura is said in Spanish. Like when I was living in Spain, my best Spanish friend that I made there, I just loved being able to say Laura all the time.
Oh, that is pretty.
Laura. Yeah.
It
Shout
sounds
out
like
to
flower.
Laura. She's definitely not listening to this podcast, but if she ever does, shout out to
you, Laura. Yeah, it makes it sound like a flower.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
anyway.
Very beautiful. Anyway, also beautiful, Laura,
Yes.
aka Laura.
Yes.
Yes. So today on the show, we are discussing the 1944 film Laura, which is a film noir directed by Otto Preminger, starring Gene Tierney, Dana Andrews, Clifton Webb, and a very young and kind of handsome Vincent Price. The movie opens with a murder mystery. Laura Hunt, beautiful, successful, enigmatic, has been shot to death in her apartment. We follow the detective assigned to her case, Mark McPherson, as he interviews her friends. Waldo Lydecker, who is a witty, self-absorbed newspaper columnist who credits himself with Laura's professional success. Shelby Carpenter, the charming but lazy rake that may or may not have been engaged to Laura. And Anne Treadwell, Laura's aunt, who was herself in love with Shelby. As he digs deeper and deeper into her life, Laura begins to cast a spell over McPherson, and he soon finds himself falling in love with a dead woman. Or is she? Halfway through the film, we learn that Laura is actually alive, and the murder victim is in fact the woman that Shelby, her fiancé, had been having an affair with. Now McPherson must untangle an ever more complicated web and discover whether Laura herself, the woman at the center of everything, might be a killer. Thank you. Can you tell I'm excited to talk about this movie?
Yeah. I love it. Also, I was not aware that the character of Anne Treadwell was Laura's aunt. I had no idea who she was the whole movie. I thought she was the model who was killed because she kind of looked like her. And then I was like, wait, but she's not dead. So who are you?
No, she's like 20 years older than Diane Redford.
But they looked the same to me. I was like, I don't know who you are. You just show up sometimes and you say things.
Tatum has 1940s blindness where every person in a 1940s movie looks the same.
I mean, they all talk the same and, their clothes are similar and the lighting it's hard to
Yeah. Well, I have the benefit of having seen Rebecca many times, and Judith Anderson, who plays Anne Treadwell, is Mrs. Danvers, the sort of villain of Rebecca. She is fantastic in that movie. So I was already familiar with her face before I saw this movie.
Also, please have grace for me. This movie is hard to understand. Like, you've seen this before. This is my first time watching it, and I was like, I was not expecting I was going to have to use my brain this much. And I was like, I feel like I almost need to start it over with the expectation of like concentrating, but it's too late because I'm already 30 minutes in and I'm not going to start it over.
The thing I've found about a lot of film noir is just let it sweep over you. You don't actually have to try and follow the mystery. You can if you want to. I will be honest. I have seen this movie probably a dozen times or more. This is just a comfort movie for me. I will just put it on at random times when maybe I'm folding laundry, maybe I'm down and I need to watch something familiar, and I will just rewatch it because I love it so much. Watching it this time while taking notes, I was discovering plot points that I had never noticed before. Like major shifts in the character's decision making. And I was like, oh, wait, okay, that makes sense. So, you know what?
Yeah.
You can enjoy something for the vibes. You don't necessarily have to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah. So again, like, it's not my fault that I didn't know that she was her
It's
aunt.
not your fault.
I'm sorry.
Random question. Have you ever seen The Big Sleep with Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall?
Ooh, have I?
Because that movie is famously almost impossible to follow.
I don't think I've seen that movie. No.
To the point that, like, I believe at one point during production, the director called up Raymond Chandler, who had written the original book that it's based on, and was like, okay, wait, can you please explain to me, like I'm 5, who it was that murdered this character who gets murdered in the scene? And Raymond Chandler was like, I have no idea.
Wow. Okay.
So anyway, yeah, not unprecedented for movies of this time to just make no sense. Although this movie actually does make sense.
It doesn't make no sense. There's just a lot of details that are added in.
You have to think about it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Continue with your...
no worries. So Laura, the story of Laura, is adapted from a novel by Vera Caspary. Although Otto Preminger was involved from the start as a producer, originally there was another director named Ruben Mamoulian who was hired to oversee the shoot. I do not know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, so if any relatives of his are listening, I apologize. So they began shooting the movie, but the first 2 weeks worth of dailies proved to be disappointing. And so Preminger went to head of 20th Century Fox, Darryl Zanuck, and convinced him to fire Mamoulian and install him as director instead. Preminger threw out everything that the original director had done, started over with a more subtle, thoughtful approach. One little tidbit that I read in a couple places, which I thought was funny, is in this movie, a very prominent prop is a portrait of Laura that hangs over the mantelpiece. The original, when they were originally shooting this movie...
It's not a prop, it's a piece of set dressing.
Thank you for the correction.
You're welcome.
A very important piece of set dressing, which is a portrait of Laura. So originally, the portrait that was used was painted by the wife of the director of Mamoulian. However, when Preminger threw everything out, he threw out that portrait as well.
What? Wow.
So what he ended up doing was he just took a photo of Jean Tierney. Like, he got a professional photographer to take a photo of her, enlarged it, and then had someone paint over it with oil paints to make it look like a painting. And that's the portrait that is used in the movie. And honestly, I think it looks great. You know, whatever he did, it looks convincing to me as a sort of society portrait of the time. Anyway.
Wow, that's a lot of drama.
Yeah, there's a lot of drama.
Wow.
Apparently once the production...
It also sounds like a lot of petty drama, too.
Well, here's the thing. From what I've read, it's not like it was Preminger just coming in and being like, I want to do this. Like, Zanuck looked at what Mamoulian was doing and was like, no, this is not working at all. Like, these performances are not calibrated right. The tone is not right. Everything's kind of too over the top. Everything's too... Certain people are too hysterical. Some people are too wooden. It's not working. And so when Preminger came in, what he did was he was able to take kind of a more restrained approach. It's a little more thoughtful, a little more subtle. And he ended up really elevating the material that was there. And the film ended up being this really big hit. It was a box office hit. It had a lot of Oscar nominations. And it launched Preminger's career as a director. He'd directed a few things before, but this really put him on the map. And Preminger, I mean, is a huge name. Like, there's a lot of, really classic movies he's directed. Anatomy of a Murder is one that I really love and is a really landmark film. So anyway, yeah, Laura is now regarded as an all-time classic of film noir. And it has this really intriguing premise that has been readapted and reimagined many different times throughout radio, film, television, you name it. This idea of the dead woman or, the murder victim at the center of everything, and the detective falling in love with the person whose murder he's trying to investigate is just, it's a great premise, So, yeah, that's Laura. All right, so Tatum. This movie, I discovered this movie. It was screened actually at an independent cinema in the town where I was living. think the year after college. And so I saw it on the big screen for the very first time. I was absolutely entranced by it. I loved everything about it. I loved the vibe. I loved the chemistry between the lead actors, the music, the set design. And like I said, I've now seen this movie dozens of times. It's just such a comfort movie for me. I mean, as you know, I love the 1940s. It's such a, it's such a comfort time. The movies that were made at that time, the idea of film noir and how dark everything is, the people in beautiful costumes standing in rooms and talking to each other. It's just, I love it so much. So I'm assuming that this is your first time ever seeing the movie. So what are your sort of initial thoughts, apart from obvious confusion over what happened?
Yeah, definitely a lot of confusion on my part, and I will own that. Yeah, so I I had never seen this movie before. I had heard of it, and it had been on my list, I think, for quite some time, because film noir is something where I never really, like, I didn't grow up watching film noir, and I know it's kind of its own little genre. And so as I've gotten more into film and cinema, as I've gotten older, I'm like, I need to start watching more of these classic film noirs. So I've only seen a few of them, and this was kind of another one that I was like, I would like to get around to it at some point, but just never did. So yeah, I was telling Geneva a little bit before we got on the air that this movie, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, because there's certain aspects that I really, really like. I think I was not expecting the idea, like that twist that happens, about 35, 40 minutes into it. So that really intrigued me a lot. But kind of what was happening before then, I wasn't entirely interested in, because I was like, okay, a murder. We're trying to solve a murder, going around asking questions. Okay. But then when we had that twist, I was like, oh, all right, now I'm into this. And I liked how they had kind of weaved in these stories of like Waldo and his creepy relationship with Laura that she for some reason doesn't see as creepy from the very beginning, which I don't know what that says about her. But so I liked how it kind of brought him around. In the beginning, my initial impression of him was like, this guy's really creepy. I don't like him. And then as time went on, I was like, you're really controlling. This makes me uncomfortable. And then it got to a point where I was like, oh, but he's kind of nice and seems upset that she's dead and all of these things. So maybe he's a good guy. And then, so I just like went on a journey with him. And then by the end, I was like, no, I knew you sucked. I should have stuck with my gut. So yeah, I find a lot of the characters here to be interesting, some more interesting than others. Unfortunately, I am underwhelmed by several of the acting performances by the protagonists of this story. There's a few that I like, but a lot of them I'm like, this feels very bland to me. But I also think that that's just because this isn't necessarily the style of acting that I am particularly drawn to. So yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I'm glad I watched it. There's things that I really, really liked that I felt like were unique to this story that I haven't seen in other things. But then at the same time, there were moments where I was like, okay, I feel like this is dragging. I feel like this just feels a little slow to me. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of in the middle on it, but not because I feel middle about it, but because I feel very positively about certain things and then a little bit more negatively about other things. So it balances out, as opposed to The Apartment, where I'm like, I have no feelings at all, therefore I'm in the middle. This is like, I have feelings. They just balance out to be like that. So yeah, those are kind of my overall thoughts. I am glad I watched it though.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad. I will say your feedback about some of the lead characters' performances is not unique in the sense that I've seen that from other reviews, both of the time and reviews from years later. And those performances work for me, but I definitely see where that criticism is coming. And I think that actually ties into one of, this is one of those movies where I'm like, it's perfect, but also it's very flawed. For me, the biggest flaw of this movie is in a really interesting way. So there's a piece of trivia that I came across as I was doing, a little read up on trivia about this movie for this episode, which is that when he was adapting the original story, the original novel by Vera Caspary into a film, Preminger became really, really interested in the character of Waldo Lydecker, and he considered him to be the most interesting character in the story, which, I mean,
I think he is.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
Yeah, in the film, yeah, absolutely. But in expanding his role, he changed what I think the original intention of Vera Caspary had been, which is that Laura should be the most interesting character in it, because she's the one that everyone revolves around. And she's very unique. Well, I won't say she's unique, but, she is a bit exceptional for that time in that she is this successful, independent woman who has had multiple sexual relationships and is never ashamed for it. She is, she's strong, and she's independent. She's also very kind, and she's a great friend to those around her. And she is ultimately a good person. And even though she gets caught up in this murder mystery, it's not really of her. It's due to some poor decision making in her romantic life, but it's not something that she's being shamed for. It's it's not sort of moralistic in the way that things in the 1940s could sometimes be. And I think there's a lot of really, that makes her a really interesting character in the context of the 1940s. And I think when the book then gets adapted into the film and the character of Waldo Lydecker gets expanded, Laura's character is kind of cut back. And for me, the one big flaw of this film is that we see so much of Laura through the eyes of the men in her life and not as her own person. So in the entire first part of the movie, we're only seeing her through Waldo's eyes. We're seeing her as Waldo is describing her. And she does come off as kind of, I mean, she's a little bit, you see the sort of spark that he sees in her and why he's attracted to her. But she also has this sort of, compliancy to her, which is how he wants her. He wants her to be kind of successful and admired by everyone, but his own personal possession, his own personal toy, his sort of, his Pygmalion that he has molded and only answers to him. And that's not who Laura is, but we don't get very much of a chance to actually see who Laura is, even though she comes back halfway through and we are interacting with her in the second half. We're mostly seeing her in the context of the actual murder investigation. We don't get a huge chance to see who she is apart from that. And I think the person who does have the best chance to see who she really is Mark, because Mark is the one who's digging into her life, who's, reading her private diary and her letters, not realizing that she's actually alive. It's just part of his investigation. And so I think he does have a chance to see her as a more well-rounded person. And because of that, I think there is something to their relationship. I really, really like their relationship. But the audience does not actually get a chance to see much of who Laura is. And so I think that's just kind of the one fundamental flaw about this film. I absolutely love this film, but I do wish there would just been a little more care taken to who Laura is and trying to build her in contrast to the Laura that is presented by the male characters.
Yeah, I would very much so agree with that. I think I was confused watching the film because the movie is literally, the title of it is Laura. And it was odd to me that she's such a praised character, and yet I felt like I didn't know anything about who she was. I felt like she was talked about by other people as opposed to an actual person that lived that I could really understand and just get to know them really. And I felt like for me, and I'm sorry if this is heresy, but for me, I was watching the movie and I was like, this feels like a Lorelai, Mrs. Maisel, Midge Maisel type of character in terms of every man who comes in contact with her is immediately immediately smitten and is like, I'm falling in love with you. You're amazing. You're beautiful. You're smart. You're clever. You're witty. You're funny. All of these things. And I'm like, everyone is saying this, but I don't actually see the substance that motivates all of this like infatuation from literally every single man that she comes in contact with. And so I just, that fell a little bit flat for me in the sense of like, I do agree that Waldo is the most interesting character here, but then I wish that then let's go all the way into Waldo and like not try and force a Laura story into what seems to be wanting to be his story. I just felt like there was a lot of tension there in terms of what is this movie trying to say? Like, are we supposed to care about Laura? Are we supposed to care about Waldo? Like, are we supposed to care about both? So yeah, it just like, there's this whole idea of Mark falling in love with her and not knowing who she is. And I'm like, but we don't really ever see, like, I felt like we didn't really see anything that would lead to him loving her. Like we didn't, like, yes, we see him holding her diary or we see him holding her letters or whatever, but we don't, I just felt like there wasn't enough evidence there of him really getting to know her in such a way that would justify him falling in love with her. So I don't know. For me, I think that similar to what you were saying, like, I do think for me that was the biggest flaw in this movie because I feel like it's such an essential part of the story. And the fact that for me that didn't connect, it was harder for me to be invested in what was going on.
See, I don't have any issue with the idea of all of the characters falling in love with Laura, in particular with Mark falling in love with
I don't
Laura.
either if I see the reason behind it. Like, I don't mind everyone falling in love with her being like, oh my gosh, she's amazing. I'm just like, but show me why, because she's just an avatar walking around. Like, I don't understand the motivation behind why this is happening.
In the first half, that's all she is. And for me, it's the film language and the casting of Gene Tierney do enough to make up for it, because Gene Tierney is just, oh my goodness, one of the most stunningly gorgeous people I think has ever walked this planet. She is so beautiful. Cannot say that she's the greatest of actresses, but she is so incredibly gorgeous. And the way that Otto Preminger is able to use the setting of her apartment with that huge, gorgeous photo looming over the entire living room, and that scene where Mark is walking through her apartment late at night, and he's opening her closets and he's sniffing her perfume and he's holding her letters. You just feel like her essence is there, like her ghost is there. And for me, it really works in the sense that maybe it's not the actual person. You know, he's definitely falling in love with this idea of who Laura is. That will then, you know, have to change a little bit when the actual Laura appears on the scene. But I think that the film does a really effective job of creating this sort of, you know, very noirish idea of ghosts hiding in the corners of these rooms that these people inhabit, and sort of impressions and ideas having this really oppressive effect on people and changing them and altering their decision making. I think it works really well. I love that particular scene. I struggle. I really, really like Dana Andrews as an actor and other things I've seen him in, and in this as well. I do think he can be a little bit wooden sometimes, although it does work for the character ultimately. But I really love that scene.
I did not like his performance at all. I couldn't stand it.
We'll have to disagree.
He wasn't the worst, but he definitely was not my favorite. He felt like one of the weaker ones to me.
We'll have to disagree on this, but I really liked him in this scene where he's just sort of, you know, very wordlessly and stoically, but you can see that he's kind of coming unglued in a certain way. Yeah, and the music throughout the scene too. I mean, we have to rant about how good the score is, because the score is so good. The
score is what impressed me the most about this movie. I thought the score was super well done. Even that moment when, gosh, who is it? Is it Laura? No, maybe it's Waldo. I don't remember who it is and who did this, but there's a sequence in the movie where someone, again, I'm confused. There's a lot of things happening, so I'm going to talk about this in very vague terms. Maybe you can put the pieces together when I'm done. But there's a sequence in this movie where someone is walking through some apartment somewhere, and it's kind of dark, and each time they open a door, there's kind of like this tense noise, like what's going to be behind the door when they turn the light on, and then it's fine, and then they go to the next room, and then they turn another light on. It's the tense music again. And then after they've turned all the lights on in the apartment, they continue walking around, and the music totally changes because now we know the place is safe and there's no one there. And I just thought that was really cool how the score, like, it never cut and went silent. It was just this long continuation of just like this progression of strings that just somehow transformed the tone all within one sequence. And I was like, wow, this is a really, I mean, it's definitely a 1940s score, but like I found it to be very well done. Very well done. I think the score was my favorite part of this movie.
Yeah. I mean, the Laura suite, the main theme of the movie, I have it on my film scores playlist. I listen to it all the time. It was a big hit at the time. Apparently it was later set to words and became a hit on its own, as kind of a jazz single. But yeah, it's so gorgeous and so atmospheric.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie looks gorgeous. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the awards that it won, but you know, the cinematography, the way that the Preminger uses these kind of low, slow panning shots and this really fluid movements is really beautiful to navigate the space. The way that the sets are decorated. I love again, with this being a comfort movie for me, I find this really intriguing that this movie came out in 1944, during World War II, and it's so separated from anything involving the idea of not just the war, but
I was gonna say World War II, pretty comforting for you, huh?
Yeah. It's the opposite. It's so insulated from, is that the word? It's so sealed off from anything involving the wider world, from anything involving kind of the war or politics or even just deprivation, struggles. I mean, this is just, it's very much a movie that's set within this very small, very cloistered sort of Manhattan elite, and they all stand around in these beautifully decorated rooms and they talk to each other, and yeah, I just find it very cozy.
I wanted to mention, because you brought up before, kind of, it seemed like this is kind of what you were saying, but how you could see how these men are falling in love with Laura because she's so beautiful, right? Like, she's one of the most beautiful people that you've ever seen. Like, that's in your opinion. And for me, I think, and I'm aware that this is me kind of being maybe like a little bit of a jerk. I don't know. Not a jerk, but like me being like, well, in the 21st century, blah, 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 blah. But like, and obviously this movie was made in a different time, and I respect that. But there are certain things for me where I don't know if this is necessarily a modern day thing. I think it's just for me, the way that the types of romances that I'm able to connect to versus not connect to are very different from, from a lot of people. And for me, there was a lot of messaging here that I did not particularly enjoy. Like, I was kind of angry of like, it's movies like this that perpetuate these types of romantic fantasies that don't actually exist, and it's harmful to people, like blah, blah, blah.
Interesting.
But I didn't like this concept of just, I met this woman, and she, the reason that I'm interested in her is because she's hard to get, or because she's like putting me in my place and she's speaking up and like blah, blah, she's challenging me, and that's why I'm initially drawn to her. And I'm like, I feel like there's this narrative that's continued to today of like, oh, well, you got to play hard to get, like, don't be, that's what really pulls the guys in or whatever. And I'm like, screw that message. I hate it. It's also not accurate like 95% of the time. But then there's also messages in terms of like, oh, well, just because she's so beautiful, that's what makes her attractive. And I agree. It is shown in the beginning that like she is very smart, and she's kind of it almost looks like she's an art director maybe of like
she's some sort of ad executive.
Yeah, so clearly she's very intelligent and she's very capable, but that's something that's kind of just briefly mentioned in the beginning, and I don't see that as a reason why people are falling in love with her later on. Like Shelby kind of meets her and is like, "Oh, well, I'm intrigued because you're beautiful and you are just making me, I just can't stop thinking about you because blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, okay.
Oh, interesting. I don't read their relationship that way at all.
Yeah, I guess just for me, I'm very critical when it comes to how romance is portrayed in films, because I think that the messages can be very harmful and very toxic in terms of how they continue on, and for people who watch them, and how that trains them to expect them to be treated, or how it makes them want to be treated, or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what this movie does, but for me, it triggered certain ideas of like, this is the type of stuff that I don't like. I don't like these types of, this isn't romantic. This is just, I don't know. It doesn't feel romantic to me, those types of things. So, but anyway, so those were things I just felt like, because a major part of the story is Laura being this person that everyone's falling in love with. I was like, well, I have issues with why they're falling in love with her. So,
well, I mean, the movie also has issues with the way that her relationships are playing out. I mean, the whole idea behind the movie, and the thing that I really connect with it, is the idea that Waldo is obsessed with this Laura who he has created in his mind. This Laura who is beautiful and is perfectly moldable into this, you know, impossibly pure, perfect society woman who is cultured and intelligent and successful and loved by everyone, but only chooses to love him. Like, this is this version of Laura that he's tried to mold into his ideal woman. And anytime she strays from that, you know, anytime she actually shows like, oh, I'm a normal woman with like normal human like urges, and I like a guy who's hot, and I like a guy who's closer to my age, he can't stand it, and he has to interfere, and he has to step in and do something about it.
But that's my issue with it, though. Like, going back to what we were saying before, I agree with you. I think that's a really powerful statement. But because for me, the movie is not told enough from Laura's perspective, I don't get that narrative in terms of her taking agency and her going in this direction. Like, I don't see it as something where we're really diving into an empowering story for Laura. I see it more so as like a predatory story about Waldo. You know what I mean? Like, because we don't, for me anyway, because we don't get enough Laura and we don't see it from her perspective, I think there's a lot of potential there for it to be a very like feminist, empowering type of story. And I wish it had been more of that. I mean, but because so much of this is seeing it through the lens of other men, it was harder for me to like really, really feel like that was the narrative that was actually being told. It felt like something in the background.
No, I agree with you. It's very much under the surface, and it's between the lines, and you have to pay attention. You have to think about it, you know.
And like I said, I was confused. Yeah. So. There's a lot of things I didn't pick up on
and thought very hard about it. I agree. I wish it was a little bit more on the surface, but that being said, all of the ingredients are there for me, and even though I wish it was more on the surface, the fact that those ingredients are there, if you dig at them, I really, really like. The relationship with Shelby I find kind of intriguing, in the sense that, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I get the vibe that, you know, he's attracted to her because she's beautiful, certainly, but he also really likes the fact that she's this independent, successful woman, and she's more successful than he is. She makes more money. She's literally his boss. She hires him after he asks her to, and I think he kind of likes that. I think there's something in that dynamic where he really enjoys being the person who where she's kind of the dominant force in that relationship, which I find kind of interesting.
Sorry, not to kind of just like not fully engage with
No,
what
go
I just
ahead.
said, but you brought him up, and I'm like, oh, we have to talk about this. Can we please talk about Shelby's suit?
What about Shelby's suit? His gigantic suit?
The suit that he wears the first time we see him, I was like, you look like I don't even know. I was like, you look like a human body that goes on forever.
Vincent Price, a very tall man, it turns out.
But the suit did not help. Like he's standing next to Waldo, who's like, yeah, he's shorter than him, but not like a foot and a half shorter. But even like all of the other, because I watched the movie and I was like, okay, maybe this is a 1944 style that all the men were wearing. None of the other men have a suit jacket that is that long. And I'm like, this is such a weird choice because he's already the tallest person in this movie. And this suit is so large. He's swimming in it. It's so
the proportions,
it's ridiculous.
The proportions in men's suits in the 1940s in general. Did you catch the part where I think it might be at the beginning when Waldo's gets out of the bathtub and he's getting dressed, and you see him, he's in his pants, he's got his shirt, he hasn't put on his shirt jacket yet. His pants come up to his nipples. Like, it is ridiculous.
Yes. It's amazing.
Oh man, yeah. Sometimes we think about, like, oh man, if men could only go back to the like tailored, cultured styles of the 1940s. I'm like, I don't disagree, but also, have you seen some of the way these clothing were tailored?
Sometimes when those really high pants are paired with the really short ties, you know what I'm talking about?
Exactly.
It looks so funny. I don't know if you've ever seen those like the SNL sketches that they did a while back where Bill Hader does his Clint Eastwood impression for the Chrysler commercials. Have you seen those?
That doesn't sound familiar.
Oh, they are. I will send them to you after this, but they are one of my favorite SNL sketches to ever exist. Love Bill Hader. His impression of Clint Eastwood is amazing. But it's making fun of these Super Bowl commercials that Clint Eastwood did throughout the like every commercial break at the Super Bowl. He did a different version of a Chrysler commercial. And so Bill Hader, throughout like an entire episode of SNL, they do all these different Chrysler commercials of him doing a Clint Eastwood impression, making fun of the commercial. But anyway, there is one that I will send to you that, let's just say, it plays with the height of men's pants.
I'm already picturing it in my mind.
Incredible. It's one of my favorite bits of all time on SNL. But
goodness.
Anyway,
while we're talking about costuming, I'm slightly obsessed with the look that Anne Treadwell wears the first time they visit her in this in her apartment to interview her. You probably will not remember this. I don't know why it sticks in my brain, but she's wearing like this nice sort of dark cocktail dress.
Well, I didn't even know who she was.
Yeah,
so
well, clearly.
I was like, oh, that's her.
She's
aunt.
the
Great.
older woman who is in love with Shelby and wants to be his
She doesn't look
sugar
old
mama.
to me.
Well, yeah, good. I mean, she's not very old. She's just clearly older than Laura.
I guess. Yeah. Anyway, I just couldn't figure out who she was. I was like, is she Shelby's like
Well, the weird thing
sister?
is too,
Is she his assistant?
They refer
I
to
don't
her
know.
a couple times as Laura's aunt, but in no other way do they refer to the idea of like Laura having family or like them having any connection apart from both being in love with Shelby. And I'm very intrigued by why they
what's going on here?
Why the family relationship? Why are they not just like society acquaintances? Anyway.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So when they first arrive, she's wearing this like nice cocktail dress, but then she has this this like silk scarf that is wrapped around her waist. And when I say wrapped around her waist, I mean it is like the full, just the two corners are tied together as if it's an apron, but the knot is in the front, so there's an opening in the front, and it's just kind of like an apron for the entire back of her like legs. And I'm very confused about like what that was for, because it's just, you have a dress and then you tie a scarf over it and make it like a second skirt, but it's not a skirt because it has an opening. I don't know why I'm confused about this. I feel like they do something very similar in The Best Years of Our Lives, and so I've just been like, is that a thing in the 1940s? I guess you just had a nice scarf and you tied it over your dress.
Maybe. I mean, I do that with jackets. Like if I take a jacket off, I'll tie it around my waist. People make fun of me all the time. They're like, that's a 90s thing. I'm like, I don't care. It's practical. I'm hot and I don't have anywhere to put my jacket. So I'm going to tie it around my waist.
Maybe that's it. They didn't want to carry around their scarf in any other way. They just had to tie it around their waist.
I guess.
All right, well,
yeah.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
There was one, I will just say, I know that this is like, for you, your favorite era of fashion. Mm-hmm. For me, it's not particularly like I admire, like there are definitely certain looks from this time that I do really like, but overall there are sometimes things that I'm just like, I don't get it. But there was one particular, I think I can't think of what to call it. I feel like I have to call it a suit jacket, but like a suit jacket that Laura wears where it's like striped.
Yes.
And it's when
with
she big
makes
a phone
pads.
call, but Waldo's like, do you really want to make that phone call or whatever? Yeah. I really, really liked that suit jacket a lot. I thought it was cool.
It's very 80s looking. Like I never thought about the 80s having a 40s
Maybe that's
revival,
why I like it.
Yeah, it's because it's got the huge shoulder pads and the tiny little waist. Yeah. It's very
also have an obsession with stripes, I'm realizing. Like it was a few weeks ago because I've had this, tangent, but I've had the same wardrobe for like 5 years now and I'm getting bored. So I was going through my closet and I was like, okay, what can I donate? What should I keep? And I just was looking at, I was like, 75, if not 80% of the shirts that I own are stripes.
Interesting.
So love me a good striped shirt. Anyway,
I love a stripe that too. It's hard to go wrong with stripes.
Yeah.
All right. What were we talking about again? I guess we were just sort of randomly talking about
Clint Eastwood's pants.
We could go on for another 10 minutes on those pants.
Should we just watch the sketches live on the podcast?
Live reaction, live commentary.
Yeah, exactly. People only hear it; they can't see it.
Put in a timestamp to help them follow along.
This is the content that the listeners,
the people demand.
Your Pick Movie podcast really want. Stop sending us emails about this, you guys.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm trying to think what else. I mean, there's so many things that I want to talk about, and yet I feel like we've also covered so many things. I love the character of...
I have a question.
Oh, please.
And I would think if anyone would know, you would know. Is the extra read all about it, was that ever actually a thing like in real life, or was it always just a movie thing?
That is a great question.
Because I feel like it's set in movies from then, and now it's kind of used as almost a cliche type of joke thing in modern movies. But I'm like, was this just something that someone came up with one day in a script, or was this inspired by what was actually happening on the streets? Because that happens in this movie. Someone literally says, extra, read all about it.
I would imagine it's one of those things that, like, I mean, I would imagine it goes back to the days of, Newsies and people having to go out and physically sell newspapers and try and make the headlines as exciting as possible, or else people wouldn't buy them. And so you were probably saying things like, oh my gosh, this, special edition train derailment kills thousands, try and make things as exciting as possible. This is like an extra edition of the newspaper because of this thing is so significant. And so that probably just got devolved into a theatrical shorthand of extra, read all about it.
Because it's like the same thing every time. It's never like, it never changes from that. It's never like, read all about it, extra. It's like, it's always extra, pause. Read all about it.
Well, yeah,
that's always the cadence.
Yeah, it's like how there are a lot of different, sort of like dialogue shorthands and tropes that people will work into scripts just because you need someone to communicate a particular bit of information, and that's the one that everyone collectively understands. Yeah.
Can we talk about Mark a little bit? Because I feel like you and I might have, I guess I really just want to hear your perspective on him, because for me, this very well could have to do with the acting performance, but he just felt very one note to me. And I was not invested in him at all. I was like, oh, this is just the guy that we're following around, who's basically the vessel through which we learn what's happening. and I was like, okay, but who actually are you? But I don't know. He felt very flat to me. His acting just was very like one note, very dry. I get it. Like the classic 1940s investigator, that's a thing. I get it. But he was just so monotone. And he was very unexpressive with his face, but not in a way that seemed intentional. It was just in a way that felt like, you don't know what to do with your face, so you're just not doing anything with it. I don't know. For me, I had issues with him, but I want to hear your perspective because it sounds like you connected with him quite a bit.
Yeah, and I will say I might be a bit biased because, as I said, I've seen Dana Andrews and other things. I have really liked him in other things, and I think I'm not going to say he's one of the greats, but I think he is capable of doing some very good acting. I also find him
was this
kind of
movie
attractive,
like earlier on? Was this movie like early on in his career?
Early-ish, yeah. Actually, the year before, he was in a Western called The Oxbow Incident, which he's really, really good in, playing a character who basically spends the entire movie begging for his life. Really good movie. But yeah, so to me, and again, this is my interpretation and I connect with it. I'm not saying that this is necessarily the only way to read it, but for me, I read it as this character is intentionally being played as stoic and hard-boiled, like closed off. And so part of his journey through the movie, and he only, those layers only get peeled back a little bit by the end, but for me, I find that very rewarding because I read the opening scenes as being intentionally very stoic. He's introduced as this character who's kind of this hero cop who the newspapers know about because he's the guy who is in this big gangster battle, and he has this leg full of lead. They say, he's been shot multiple times in the line of duty, but he was able to bring down this big gangster, and so people know about him. And he is very dismissive of all of this. He's just like, yeah, that was me, whatever. And so for me, that kind of informs my view of his character as being someone who is probably dealing with some sort of residual PTSD from that incident, and who also has a personality of being very undemonstrative and I think he's a really good cop, and part of his strategy for being a good cop, or a good detective, I should say, is intentionally taking himself out of the equation. So many times when he's interviewing people, instead of, staring at them or getting in their face or intimidating them, he sits down and he starts playing that little game, the little baseball game that he has.
He basically waits for them to incriminate themselves. Yeah. He's like, I'm just going to sit here and let you talk until I get what I need, because I know that you're going to say something that's going to help me get where I need to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part strategy. And also he mentions at some point it helps him to keep his nerves calm. And I think that's part of it too. And so when I see that performance, the sense that I get is that this is someone who has something going on underneath, but he deals with it by having this very placid, very sort of stoic surface. And so throughout the film, as that stoicism is kind of stripped away, and Waldo in particular keeps prodding him. They're like, oh, you're acting really weird. You're in love with Laura. You know how crazy that is? You're such a weirdo. And he just deals with it by getting really even more flat, but also really annoyed. And he's like, get out of here. But you can tell that actually is affecting him. And so then when Laura comes back and he's shocked, but you can also tell he's pleased, and the whole sort of issue,
the way he like wipes his eyes,
oh my goodness,
like do a double take.
Yeah. And like these little sort of side smiles, you can kind of tell that when he's like relieved at something, the whole drama of is she actually or is she not engaged to Shelby, and she'll tell him and she's not, and he'll sort of relax, and then he'll find out it's on again, and you can see him getting like visibly gruffer.
He's very invested.
He's so invested.
Keeps asking the question to like anyone who he comes in contact, whether it's Waldo or Shelby or Laura. He's like, okay, so she said this, but is it actually? But blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, does it matter? Yeah. Like, but for him it does. For him it does.
Yeah. Will someone please tell this man, is it on or is it off? He's dying. But yeah. So, and I'm just that's the kind of character I often connect with. Is I really love a stoic character who has something going on underneath, and you can see. I know Tatum is already smirking. You can see things peeking out, and then by the end, he realizes that Laura likes him back, and they can start dating each other, and I think it's very sweet.
Do they actually, at the end, decide that they're gonna date? Is that like a thing?
Well,
I know that they have their little kiss at the door, but is there ever a moment when it's like, okay, Shelby's in the past, and we're gonna like get together now, type of thing? I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, there is the scene.
I was so confused by the end. I was like, we have that. There's so because the end is just the culmination of all of these things. Of like, oh, so this happened, but this happened, but this happened, and this, blah, 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 and I'm like,
what happened?
So by the end, I was like, I can't think anymore.
Yeah. I mean, as with many movies, particularly those that are like action noir thriller things, the question of like, are these two people destined for a long-term relationship is probably not. These are people coming together under extremely, traumatic circumstances. Most likely this is not going to work out, but we can always wish. But basically after he, so Laura being found alive, and it being discovered that Diane Redfern is the one who was killed, immediately throws suspicion on either Laura or Shelby. Which is not the aunt. That is the model. Correct. Correct.
Okay.
We never see Diane Redfern alive. We only see her in a photograph once. Otherwise, she's only ever referred to by other characters.
I thought we... Okay, yeah, that's just another thing I was confused about, because I thought we did see her. Maybe that's why I thought that the aunt was the model, because that sequence where Shelby and what's-her-face are sitting down at the table eating dinner, and Laura walks in and sees them and confronts them and is like, oh, why are you guys having dinner? Like, she has my little whatever pocketbook or
the
thingy thing,
case,
whatever it is. But now I'm realizing that that's because the aunt is in love with Shelby, not because that is him with the model.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm in my defense. It makes sense that I was confused between the two of them.
Sense.
It's not because I think everybody looks the same. It's because in that scene where we do see her, I literally thought that was the model in that scene. I did not realize it was the aunt.
can understand that confusion. It's really confusing when there is a pivotal character in a movie who's never actually seen on screen. That is very confusing. Yeah, basically the character of Shelby is a charming sleazebag who always has multiple women running after him, always has multiple women that he's seeing on the side. I think he genuinely does, I don't want to say love Laura, but really likes Laura and would love to be married to her.
He cares for her more than he cares for other people.
Yeah, he's incapable of being monogamous, and Anne understands that about him and is okay with it, which is why she tells Laura, I think I would be much better for him than you would be, because I am willing to accept him
with it.
Yeah, as he is. Laura is not willing to accept that, or at least maybe she thinks she is, but she probably would not be.
Yeah.
Anyway, so where was I going at before that? Yeah, so at the end, so basically, when Diane Redfern is revealed to have been the murder victim instead, it is Shelby and Laura who are the prime suspects. And so the next portion of the movie is Mark trying to figure out this woman that I've sort of developed this obsession with. Is she actually a murderer or not? And it eats away at him. He's like, I need to know the truth. And so he finally brings her in for this interrogation scene into the station. It's like the only time he actually goes into a police station.
He puts two super bright lights right in her face. I'm like, dude,
calm down.
What does... Like that, I don't think that's going to do anything to help accomplish what it is you're going for.
He does find the killer. I will not say his methods are strictly by the book. Anyway,
let me. Sorry, just to interrupt real quick, if that's okay. But you kind of brought it up, and I wanted to mention it anyway. I feel like Mark. I'm like, dude. Who do you answer to? I never see you talking to other, you don't have a partner.
Well, he has other cops, but they all seem to work under him. I don't know that he answers to anyone.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't, who has, what is the authority? Because there's just certain things where it's like, oh, he is all by himself walking through a crime scene and picking up things and touching them. And I'm like, he could be the murderer and he could be moving things around, but no one else is there. Like, it just felt very and yes, this is the 1940s, blah blah blah.
They just discovered
there were but not even fingerprints, but it's like he could be moving evidence. Like, he even says to someone,
well, to be fair,
he's like, do you know, he was like, do you know how big of a deal it is to withhold evidence or whatever?
To be fair, it's made very clear that the police have already come through and extensively inventoried the crime scene, dusted for fingerprints, done all the sort of forensic work that they were capable of doing at that time. Because he mentions that when Shelby tries to put the key back and pretend it was there all along, he's like, nope, that was not there. So I think the idea is that all the grunt work has already been done, and now you can bring in the detective who can just kind of treat the scene however he wants, knowing that, you know, any photographs or cataloging has already been.
I get that. I just don't think that it makes sense to have someone to have like complete free reign and seemingly no accountability for anything that he does.
I mean,
like, I don't care
noir.
what time period this is. Like, you've got to have somebody that's checking in on you to make sure that, like, you're doing I mean, I don't know. I was just like, he's doing whatever he wants. And it wasn't necessarily like a plot hole that bothered me. I just found it funny. I was like, this is one of those things that's in a movie and you're meant to not think about it. It's like, don't overthink it. It just is what it is. And I'm like, I understand that that's what I'm supposed to do, but also it's really funny that he can just do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And doesn't have a problem. Like, there's no problem with it.
It's one of the delightful tropes of film noirs that police bosses don't exist unless the detective is going off the rails and I need your badge and gun on my desk right now. You're off the case.
Yep. Anyway, sorry. I just wanted to, you mentioned it briefly and I wanted to like just talk about that for a hot minute, but sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think I was just sort of like going through, I think, what I interpret to be Mark's internal journey throughout that movie, because I think like he needs to figure out if this woman he's obsessed with is actually a murderer or not. And I think when he shows up, Laura is attracted to him, and he's certainly a contrast from the other men in her life. And so that moment when he's finally like, I really needed to know, and also I couldn't, like, I needed official surroundings, which I don't know if he means it that way, but like, what does that mean? Exactly. I needed official surroundings. I think there's this
no clue.
There's this moment of sort of breaking of tension between the two of them where they can kind of be free to be like, oh, we're both into each other, you know? And she kind of smiles at him. She calls him Mark for the first time. He kind of smiles at her. And then it's the next day, I think, that Waldo, basically Laura has told him everything. And Waldo is like, okay, you're into this police guy. He's not good enough for you. He calls women dames. He's so uncultured, blah, blah, blah. And so it's just kind of accepted that, like, they're into each other. And that's, I think, that's the extent of their romance, is that this sort of implicit understanding of like, we like each other, we're attracted to each other, you know, if all of this goes well, we're gonna try this out, we're gonna see if this happens. Of course, after what then happens, the traumatic actual ending, who knows if that's gonna work out. You know?
Yeah.
But
I love how much dame is used as an insult.
He calls women dames.
I feel like if any woman were to be called a dame today, I feel like it'd be like, ooh, a dame. Like, wow, that's
dame,
so
Judi
elegant
Dench,
and
dame,
elevated.
Yeah.
Wow. Almost feels like royalty. But apparently not back then.
Doll in Atlantic City once got a fox fur out of me.
So I'm curious. I wanted to ask you, what are the acting performances in this movie that work for you, and what are the ones that don't?
I mean, basically everything in this movie works for me. I understand when people say that, like, that Mark is too stoic, like, is too flat, I guess. Again, I read it as an intentional performance of someone who's kind of stoic and repressing, but I can understand reading it instead as just a sort of flat, bad performance. And I definitely understand the sort of critique that Gene Tierney is also too flat and does not quite live up to what everyone says about Laura. Although again, I tend more to blame some of the choices with the writing and the framing, because I think maybe with a little bit more focus on Laura, she could have shown a little bit more. But I think those are the two performances that I do understand critiques of them, even if they work for me.
Interesting. Yeah, because for me, it's not that I think any of the performances are bad. Mm-hmm. It's just that for me, I'm like, they just fall flat and they feel kind of blah. Yeah. So for me, the only performances that actually work for me are Waldo and Bessie. I think that the two of them are doing a really, really great job.
I was going to ask you what you thought of Bessie. I love Bessie so much.
I loved her. I thought she was great. I wish there was more of her, but I also feel like the fact that there's only a little bit of her makes her feel more special.
Just a little sprinkling of Bessie. She's the Thelma Ritter of this movie.
Yeah. So the two of them, I was very impressed with their performances, but everyone else, I was like, this feels very one note.
Yeah. I mean, Waldo is just Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb, which, fun fact, he was primarily a Broadway star before this movie. And when they were first developing this movie, Daryl Zanuck wanted to cast, I don't know his name, but some guy who was like known, he'd played like villains in Heavies and other movies and stuff like that. And Preminger was like, no, we need to cast someone who is not going to immediately read as villainous to the audience. And Clifton Webb at this time was primarily a Broadway actor on the stage. Like, he hadn't done movies, anything on screen for like 20 years. He did a lot of musicals, he did a lot of comedies on the stage, and so if anyone knew who he was at this time, that's the context that they would have been bringing to him, of him being this sort of like lighter character who's kind of like, you know, agile and funny, and he sings and he dances and stuff like that. And so all of that, I think it's so interesting watching this movie and kind of bringing that context to it. And of course he's absolutely phenomenal. Like, he plays all the different sides of Waldo so well. The, like, you know, sort of cultured, witty, you know, you can believe that he is like selfish, but in a very charming way. And you can,
my lunch is more important than your entire life's work.
Yeah. And so I feel like you can see what Laura maybe not saw in him, but tried to convince herself that she saw in him, that he does have this sort of heart of gold underneath it all. But then when the switch is flipped, and you start to see the really jealous, possessive, controlling side, and the side that's basically at the end going to try and execute a murder suicide. It's so chilling, and he does it so well.
I don't know if this is a crazy thing to say, but when I was watching this movie, I was like, you know who would have been really convincing in this role if they'd either been alive back then or if this movie was remade today? Christoph Waltz. I felt like I could see Christoph Waltz playing this character. But
yeah.
Anyway, I don't know why that came to my mind, but I was like, I feel like Christoph Waltz could be a good Waldo.
Make him German, make him Austrian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I could see it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
miss Christoph Waltz. I need more of him in my life. He was like in so many movies, and then he did some like terrible rom-coms, and
he did rom-coms.
Where are you? No, he did. Yeah, I think he was like a father in a couple rom-coms of like, I'm the dad who's like, I don't like your boyfriend.
See, the thing for me with Christoph Waltz is he's a very talented actor, but in American movies, he tends to only play the same person. And so I'd love to see him play some other character. You know, he tends to play variations on the same character.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that again, like major tangent, but I will say that Christoph Waltz, I won't say it's the same performance, but his performance that he gives in Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained are very similar in a lot of ways. They're very different in the sense that in Inglourious Bastards, he plays a very complex villain. And then in Django Unchained, he's not really a villain at all. But there are a lot of similarities. And I remember my boy Leo. I love Leo. He's one of my favorite actors of all time. I mean, he's my favorite actor of all time. Him and Cate Blanchett. I'm like, bow down. I love you both. But I was so pissed when Christoph Waltz won the Best Supporting Actor nomination, or the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for Django Unchained, because I was like, you just won this Oscar for the same performance in Inglourious Bastards, which he deserved in Inglourious Bastards. But I was like, in Django Unchained, my boy Leo gave a way better performance. He sliced his hand open.
There are multiple memes.
I just, and also even just aside from that dramatic whatever of him breaking his hand, because that happens with actors sometimes, but I just felt like Leo deserved that supporting actor win, and I was mad that Christoph Waltz won that. Not that I am anti-Christoph Waltz. I love Christoph Waltz, but I'm like, dude, you just won this for the same role a few years ago.
Yeah.
No.
Yep. Well,
sorry.
Sometimes
and I
the
think
Oscars
at that point,
be the way they are.
And I think at that point we were still in the time period that Leo had never won an Oscar.
Oh yeah.
And so every time he was nominated for anything, I was like, this is going to be the time that he's going to win. And then every time he didn't win, I was like, damn it.
Yeah.
And then he won for The Revenant, which I'm like,
I know. It's like, I mean, it's one of those,
now he's got an Oscar
very much
win,
one of those, like,
we
we got to just get it out of the way. We got to just give him one for anything, and then we can all relax. Ugh. But if we'd only held on a few more years, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he really deserved
his
it.
best role ever. Hot take. His best role ever. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think that is
agree. I don't even think that's a hot take.
Show-stopping. Oh, I know a lot of people that are like, it's fine. I'm like, no. It is.
No, it's phenomenal.
It is a masterclass. Like, it is incredible. Yeah, I'm like Aviator, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Those are my favorite, but also Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is top. That is my favorite Leo performance. Anyway, tangent, sorry, but love Leo, and also Quentin Tarantino, and also Cate Blanchett, and should we just say all of our favorite actors?
Tatum is so trying to avoid talking about this movie.
No, I'm not. I just, once I start talking about,
I know once you start talking about Leo, it's hard to stop.
Leo and Quentin Tarantino, I just
yeah.
Should we?
I am intrigued by your idea, though.
Should we talk about the Killers of Flower Moon trailer now?
It just dropped today for anyone who's listening, so it might be slightly on the brain for.
It's not like I've been waiting for that movie to come out for 9 years.
I am intrigued actually by your casting ideas. I actually would. This is one of those movies where I'm like, I think this movie is almost perfect, but also I think a really, really interesting remake with the right director and the right cast could be incredible. I would love to see this movie remade if it was done well. So yeah, I'd
be down for that. Yeah. I think it's possible. I think it could be redone and done well. I don't think it's something where it's like, this is untouchable and no, I'm like, no, I feel like it could be, because there's some movies where it's like, don't touch it, don't touch it, let it be. And this is one where I'm like, it's great, but also it would be interesting to see it remade now.
Again, it's like you said, all the elements are there. I would just love to see it done through the eyes of a female director or a female screenwriter. I think that could be so interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Anyway,
I was about to go on a tangent about Greta Gerwig and the way she adapts things, but I'm not.
Wow. If we want to get into hot take territory.
I mean, I love Greta Gerwig. She's made one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years, but also there's one movie she made that I get very angry about. But anyway, I love Greta Gerwig. I absolutely love her. She's very inspirational. It's just there's one movie that she made that I'm like, this makes me really mad, but that's okay. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, it's Little Women, in case anyone's wondering.
And I don't think it's a hot take that I don't like it. I just think that there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know the source material and the history of Louisa May Alcott is enough to really.
Well, there are people out there who will say this is one of the best works of adaptation ever, and that I don't understand. You can love the movie, that's fine, but this is not a good work of adaptation. This is creating a new, and that's fine. Pride and Prejudice, one of my favorite movies of all time, not a great work of adaptation, but a great example of taking a source material and reimagining it and creating your own story. And that's what Little Women is doing. And if it works for you, that's fine. But
yeah, I think I'm like, if you like Little Women and you haven't read the book and your only context is this iteration, this adaptation of the book, this is the only Little Women movie that you've seen, I can understand why you'd like it if you don't have any connection to anything else. Like, yeah, it looks nice. The acting's good. Like, there's some nice moments in there with the script.
Sometimes good. Sorry.
That's actually very true. There are certain performances that are not good. Also, the casting. I'm not going to go into like.
Right,
there's a lot of casting decisions that I'm very upset about.
We can talk more about this. I can just see
I'm going to stop.
Bubbling
There's
up.
a lot of things.
Resentment bubbling
it's
up
like
in Tatum.
It's like the snowball is really starting to gain traction, and I'm like, I have a lot more things I could say. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stop now. I'm so sorry, Geneva. We're at like an hour and a half, and I don't want to like take up any more time not talking about this movie. Go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I think we were winding down anyway. We were talking about Waldo, how great he is in that role.
Yes.
We were talking about Bessie, Laura's maid, how much we both love her performance.
I loved her.
Yeah. Did you want to say some more about her?
I don't know. I just felt like she was a breath of fresh air. I felt like she was the only person in this movie where I felt like she was just fully her. Mm-hmm. She wasn't trying to put on a show. She wasn't trying to hide a certain part of herself. She wasn't trying to, pretend to be like, she was just her. And she was like, I'm upset, so I'm going to cry and I'm not going to apologize for it. Or she's like, I love Laura so much that all I want to, I just want to stay here and work and, don't send me home. This is, I just felt like she was the most honest character in this movie in terms of just very true to herself. And I found it to be very refreshing. And I liked seeing someone have a response to Laura's death that was not having to also juggle like the stakes of what it means now that she's dead. It's like, no, I'm just dealing with an emotional response to someone that I love dying. Yeah.
And I think she serves as...
I loved her. Yeah. I thought she was great.
I think she serves...
And she's really smart too. Like, she says certain things. It's like, oh wow, you have a good perspective and we need to hear what you have to say, type of thing.
Yeah. She's very good at her job.
She's very wine bottle thing.
Observant. Yeah, she's a great employee. Like, she understands the needs of her employer and wants to care for this woman who's cared for her even when she thinks she's dead. I think she serves as a really important counterpoint too to, again, there's that issue that we hear more about Laura and her qualities than we actually see them on screen. But she is this great evidence of the fact, people say that Laura is not just beautiful, but she's also this really good person, that she's very warm, that she has a lot of friends, that she's very inviting and thoughtful and kind. And Bessie's kind of the living embodiment of that. Like, Bessie's this character that she doesn't take shit from anyone. She's very, Mark shows up and starts asking her questions and she's very ACAB, which I always find funny. But, she is devoted to Laura because Laura is, we can tell, a good person who has been really kind to her. And I think that's important.
I mean, I think maybe other people said this and I just don't remember, but I remember Bessie specifically saying, oh no, I know that she couldn't do this. Like, Laura would never do something like this. And I just really liked the fact that someone who really, really knew her and didn't have anything to hide or cover up, she was honestly saying, I know for a fact that Laura would never do this. And yeah, I just felt like Bessie was this touchstone to reality and actually like who Laura is as a real person, as opposed to, all these other people that are just trying to get something out of her or building her into something that she's not or whatever. Well, Bessie was like, I know who she is. I love her for who she is. And I know, I know who she is really. And I'm not trying to change it or whatever.
Yeah. Well, a layer in this movie that I find really intriguing, and again, this is kind of me digging under the surface and sort of clawing things out that I think are in there, although maybe I'm just reading into them because I've seen this movie so many times. But I find the class element of it to be really interesting. I mean, this movie is set almost entirely among the upper class, the sort of wealthy elite. And Mark is coming in as this sort of more working class, uncultured, normal, down-to-earth person. And then Bessie is the only other person of that kind of world, even though they're very different worlds, but they're not the sort of moneyed elite. And the little glimpses of Laura that we get, I feel like, are kind of contradictory, because the sense that I get in general is that she is not of that moneyed elite either. She's a woman who has worked, and she's career driven. When Waldo first meets her, she's like 17 years old and she's already got a job, and she's ambitious, and she's going out on her own initiative and trying to get endorsements for her company. Like, this woman, she wants to work, she loves to work, she wants to get to the top. And so and she also, like, the fact that she connects with Mark and she connects with these other people who are not necessarily part of that wealthy circle indicates to me that that's not really, that maybe she has these origins in like a family or an environment that is not, you know, not necessarily coming from wealth. But then at the same time, they refer to the fact that Anne Treadwell's her aunt, which makes me very confused about what her family situation is. I wish we had a little more info. But I just find that really intriguing. And, you know, Waldo, part of his building up Laura and feeling like he created her is like, I taught her what to wear. I taught her how to do her hair. I introduced her to all these wealthy friends. Like, I helped her, like, set up her apartment and everything. Like, clearly he's trying to turn her into this high class, wealthy woman. And she seems to take to it. Like, she's an intelligent woman. She seems to have good taste. But is that necessarily who she is? You know, is how much of that is her and how much of that is just her adapting to what Waldo is imposing on her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I almost wonder if there's something, and this is just me externally processing, it's not a fully formed thought, but I almost wonder if there's something there in terms of, like, something there thematically in terms of having that that large portrait on the wall of, like, this is the, you know, this apartment is a whole, like, mm-hmm. This piece of art along with the apartment, that's one version of Laura. Like, the apartment and the painting, that is that version of Laura. But Laura as a person, it's almost like she's a ghost living in her own home of, like, the portrait on the wall is who the apartment communicates that she is, and that's what everyone else is comfortable with her being, but she's almost like, yeah, but that's not me. I mean, I'd have to watch it again, but I feel like from what I remember, there is kind of a sense of her not necessarily feeling fully safe in her home. And maybe that's just because of the circumstances of, like, let's lock the door to make sure no one gets in, which would make anyone feel unsafe in their home. So I don't know if it's just because of the circumstances or if it's something thematically that's put in there. But I feel like, you know, the portrait is such a like a prominent thing that is seen in this movie that I have to assume that there's a reason why it's there. There's a reason why it's that size. There's a reason why it's those colors, why it's on the wall in that place, and why people keep looking at it. So I feel like there's almost this concept of there's two versions of Laura. There's this perfect painted, you know, etiquette
society woman,
savvy version of her, and then there's actually her.
So, no, I think that's, anyway, I think
that's
really,
maybe me digging deep into things that aren't there either, but, you know.
I think that's a really good, really insightful point. Yeah. And I mean, to bolster that, the movie ends with this shot of, you know, like, Waldo, he basically tries to kill Laura, fails, kills himself, and Laura and Mark rush forward, and the movie ends with this shot of the clock that Waldo had given Laura that's broken. And I think it could very easily, maybe in a slightly more melodramatic version of the screenplay, have ended with maybe the building on fire and the portrait going up in flames or something like that. But either way, it is ending on this idea of this beautiful, you know, wealthy, expensive object that Waldo has given her has been cracked and shattered, and now that part of her life is not going to work anymore. And, you know, you can certainly bet that she's going to be moving out of that apartment as soon as she possibly can. Like, 2 murders have been committed there.
Yeah. Just to kind of, I guess, say one final thing, because I realized we didn't really talk about the ending too much, but kind of to go back into just how I find Waldo to be, quite honestly, the most intriguing character in this story. But I really liked the idea of, he wants to kill Laura because he doesn't want anyone else to have her. And I find that to be really interesting because his perspective is not, I'm going to go kill the people that are taking her away from me, or I'm going to kill myself because I can't take it. It's, I'm going to kill her because no one else can have her. And I just find that to be a really interesting plot line and character choice for that person. I'm not going to like fully analyze what that means right now because we've been talking for a long time, but I just think that, yeah, I just think that's a really, really interesting character choice. And I think there's a lot there, and it says a lot about who he is and, quite frankly, how selfish he is. And that's established from the beginning that, you know, he cares more about his lunch than someone else's career and goals and passions. And yeah, I just feel like it's a final, I don't know, just like a final point that, yeah, he's actually a really, really selfish person, that he's not even willing to take himself out of the scenario or harm the people that, I'm not saying this is true, but maybe in the way that he sees it, harming the people that are guilty of this crime that he sees in his head. He's like, no, I'm going to kill the innocent person who is being taken away. You know,
it's Laura herself. You know, the idea that Laura could exist in the world, making choices and living a life that does not include him or does not live up to the standards that he has imposed on her. It's like he's projected all of himself onto her.
Yeah.
And so if she does not comply, he can't take it, and he has to destroy that self that he's put onto her.
Yeah, it's totally selfishly motivated, but also really interesting because there's a lot going on with him. So yeah. But ultimately, I'm glad he met his demise at the end, because he would have gone on killing people for the rest of his life, because apparently with Laura's track record, people are going to be falling in love with her left and right. So
yeah, well, at least, I mean, when it's so interesting with the other men, you know, he just sort of manipulated and acted behind the scenes to drive them away. But I guess there is this element of escalation about it. And I find the question of how much did Laura know really interesting, because when Laura first emerges on the scene, you know, she disobeys Mark's orders. She talks to Shelby even when he told her not to talk to anybody. And then when Mark questions her about it, she's like, I've never been and I never will be compelled by anything I didn't do of my own free will. And I believe that she believes of herself, but at the same time she is so in the thrall, like under the manipulation of Waldo. And so there's this growth that she needs to go through and finally realizing what a monster he is. And when it's revealed, she has this moment of like, I that makes total sense. I feel like I've realized I've known this the entire time and I've just not wanted to see it, which I find really intriguing. Like this question of this, you know, really bright, you know, ambitious woman who is so successful in her life otherwise, and yet is, I guess, unwilling to see how much of a problem Waldo was, because, you know, she's too grateful to him. She owes so much to him. He seems to, you know, when he's being good to her, he's very good to her. You know, she doesn't want to just cut that out of her life, but realizing, oh no, this is way out of my control. This is something that needs to end, and I should have ended it earlier. And the fact that she blames herself for what ultimately happens is really intriguing. Being like, if I had said something earlier, maybe this would never have happened. Maybe Diane Redfern would never have died. Like, I feel partially responsible.
Yeah, because I think in that moment she's like, I killed him, or I killed her just as much as Waldo did. And then Mark's like, what do you mean? She's like, well, you know, I didn't say anything and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I didn't stand up to him earlier.
Yeah. So just as like, I guess this is a final brief point that I just personally wanted to touch on. The bathtub. I think it's funny.
It's such a good,
it's a hilarious choice.
Incredible opening sequence.
The fact that like that's kind of how we're introduced to him, and not just him in the bathtub, but him being like totally not like embarrassed about this man he's never seen, like seeing him naked getting out of a bathtub. Like, it's like, this is such an interesting character introduction. Well, but I think it says a lot about him being kind of weird and mentally unstable, but also him being like so confident in himself that like, yeah, I can walk around naked and I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
If it makes you uncomfortable, because it makes me feel cool and like makes me feel like I have the upper hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like there's sort of latent undercurrents too that various people have teased out of it because, Waldo himself, like he is obsessive about Laura, but as far as we know, it's not like they've ever slept together. I don't know if he even wants to sleep with her. He seems very asexual in a way. Clifton Webb himself was, I believe, maybe not openly gay, but was gay. And I think that's a part of the performance as well. And so there's that idea of like, what exactly is the nature of his desire for Laura? And what is the nature of his desire for other people or lack of understanding of other people's thoughts and desires? I don't know. I feel like there's some really interesting like other dimensions to Waldo's character that are kind of wrapped up in that opening sequence and the way that he interacts with Mark, the way he uses nudity to kind of try and get Mark off his guard, although it doesn't seem to work very, very well, I think is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, Waldo's the most important character. Or not important, the most interesting character. I stand by it.
No, you're definitely not wrong.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying to see if there's anything else really that I want to talk about when we've gone through pretty much the entire movie. Are there any other like scenes that stand out or little moments that you wanted to mention?
I don't think so. I feel like I brought up everything that I understood. Everything else, I'm like, I don't even know what happened, so I couldn't even talk about it.
Can we acknowledge, actually, speaking of the opening scene, the incredible line from Waldo where he's talking about, he's describing his relationship with Laura, and he's like, Laura believed me to be just the best. He's like the wisest and wittiest man in the world, but also the kindest and nicest. And Mark's like, well, are you? And he's like, well, for her sake, I tried to be the kindest, nicest, and wittiest,
Wow.
And Mark is like, all right, well, did it work? And Waldo has this incredible line where he says, let me put it this way. I should be sincerely sorry to see my neighbor's child devoured by wolves.
Yep.
Sums up his character.
Mark is definitely a cut to the chase type of person.
Yeah. And Waldo is like let me find the most florid way possible to tell you that I'm an absolute jerk, but make it sound very charming.
I did write down this one line from the movie. I don't remember who says the first part. Maybe it's Waldo. Maybe it's Shelby. I don't know. But someone is like saying how they're upset about Laura's death or whatever. And they're like, I should have stopped it. And then Mark goes, well, it's too late now. Like, okay. Like super empathetic to talk to someone who's like supposedly grieving. Like, well, you didn't, so it's too late.
I remember that line. I don't remember the context, but yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
There's some really good lines.
It's like, good thought, but it's not going to change anything. They're dead, and it's your fault.
Sorry. All right. So let's move on. Talk a little bit about the legacy and the awards that this movie received. So as I mentioned, this movie was a box office hit. It was also a critical hit. It won the Oscar for Best Black and White Cinematography. This was still the time when there were separate cinematography awards for black and white versus color film. It was also nominated for 4 other Oscars: Best Director for Otto Preminger, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor for Clifton Webb, extremely well deserved, should have won, and Best Black and White Art Direction. So I pulled 2 reviews. This one from the 1940s from the New York Times, which is critical of the movie, and I think kind of is in the similar lines to what we've been talking about. So New York Times says, at the risk of being unchivalrous, we venture to say that when the lady herself appears upon the scene via a flashback of events leading up to the tragedy, she is a disappointment. Virginie Tierney simply doesn't measure up to the word portrait of her character. Pretty, indeed, but hardly the type of girl we'd expected to meet, for Miss Tierney plays at being a brilliant and sophisticated advertising executive with the wild-eyed innocence of a college junior. I thought it was a little bit harsh, but, we've talked about kind of this is one of the flaws of the movie. All right, and then Roger Ebert, our favorite, good old Roger Ebert. In 2002, he reviewed this movie. He gave it 4 stars, and in his review, he wrote, the whole film is of a piece, contrived, artificial, mannered, and yet achieving a kind of perfection in its balance between low motives and high style. What makes the movie great, perhaps, is the casting. The materials of a B-grade crime potboiler are redeemed by Waldo Lydecker, walking through every scene as if afraid to step in something. And I just think that sums up my feelings about this movie, about how it is sort of very artificial in certain ways, and yet the way that those elements are combined, it's the elements that could make it this sort of B movie, and yet it is so elevated by the talent of Otto Preminger behind the camera, a lot of the performances and the craft at work. I think it's just such a great movie. And it's also just a beautiful piece of writing, in my opinion. That idea of Waldo Lydecker walking through every scene as if afraid to step in something, like, that's just gorgeous, gorgeous writing. This is why Ebert was just the best. Anyway. All right. So, we've talked quite a bit about my love for this movie, how comforting I find it, how I just return to it again and again. I think, again, I really, we've talked before about movies where the imperfections of them paradoxically causes us to want to dig further into them and makes them stick with us longer. And this is one of those movies for me, because I really do wish that there was more of a focus on Laura and more attention paid to her as a character and the female perspective of this movie, and drawing out that theme of a man who is imposing himself and his vision upon an independent woman, and yet, because those things are there, even if they're under the surface, and I wish they were displayed more, I keep coming back to it. I keep clawing into it, because there's so much subtext there. There's so much there that's between the lines that I just love it. And so, yeah, I keep coming back to it. Plus, again, I know it's silly and it's probably not going to work out, but I really do love the relationship between Laura and Mark. I like their chemistry. I enjoy them together. So that's what has stuck with me about this movie. Is there anything about this movie that's moved you, or do you think might stick with you?
I honestly feel like I'd have to watch it again, because in my mind, there's still so much of it that's just jumbled that I almost feel like I don't really have a full grasp of the story. So I guess, like, if anything, the thing that's going to stick with me, given what I understand about the film, is that twist was really unexpected. I was like, whoa, she's alive.
Good. I was actually very curious about whether you would figure out that was coming ahead of time. So I'm really glad to hear that you didn't.
No. Yeah, I was definitely shocked by it. So I think that's probably going to be what sticks with me, because it genuinely was a shock for me. And I always appreciate when movies can do that.
Especially a movie that's, 80 years old.
That says more about me than the movie, though. Like, I probably should have known this since it came out that long ago, but
no, it's fine.
I'm watching it now. Yeah. So there's a time for everything.
All right. So, Tatum, what are we going to be watching and talking about next week?
Yeah, so a little bit of a controversial choice for me.
Wait, why is this controversial?
Because this is a Disney Pixar film.
Oh,
and
I forgot about your vendetta against Disney.
You forgot about what? Yeah, I am a very, very strong hater of Disney and everything that
they
have done.
Pixar at this time? I don't remember when they actually acquired.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I am very upset with the things that Disney is doing and basically everything about their business model nowadays. But this movie came out before Disney really got into a place of just being a conglomerate that owns everything and is just anyway. So this movie for me,
people listening are like,
it is very
what on earth are they doing?
Yeah. I could do a whole podcast episode about that. But anyway, this is a movie that's very special to me. I will share more about the context in which I saw it when we talk next week. But we will be discussing The Incredibles from 2004.
Oh, such a good movie.
It is my favorite Pixar film, and for reasons that we will discuss next week.
We should do like a top 3, top 5 Pixar movies or something next week.
Oh, yeah, that would be fun. Let's do that. But yeah, so I'm really looking forward to talking about it. This movie is hilarious. It's a movie for people of all ages, and it's just genuinely a fantastic film, and it means a lot to me. So Yeah, we will talk about it next week. I will try my best to minimize my Disney hate. But, you know, maybe we'll just talk about The Incredibles within its own little bubble.
We could just go off on a tangent about Leonardo DiCaprio again.
Did you know that Leonardo DiCaprio was actually considered to be one of the voice actors in The Incredibles?
I
Not
cannot
true.
Imagine Leonardo DiCaprio voicing a Pixar character.
I mean, Samuel L. Jackson was in it. But yeah, he's actually the voice of Jack the baby. Leonardo DiCaprio's best role, Jack in The Incredibles. Wow. No, but okay. Yes, that's what we're talking about next week. So join us then. It's going to be fun.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpickpod@gmail.com. Our theme song was composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like this show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.